My name's Emily Leachman. I work at University City, and the story I'm going to tell you today is a story of caps for sale. It's a folk tale with roots in different places all over the world, including India, Africa, Britain, but perhaps the most famous version is the picture book by Esfir Slovatkina, but this is a story of caps for sale. So once upon a time there was a peddler, and he worked in his village selling his caps. Well, he wasn't like an ordinary peddler who carried his wares in a suitcase. He carried them on top of his head, and he would walk up and down the streets and he would say, "Caps, caps for sale, 50 cents a cap." And he would walk up and down the streets and his wares would be on his head and they would be stacked in a pile. And first on his head would be his own cap, and then above them the blue caps, and above them the brown caps, and then the gray caps, and then the red top caps at the very top. And he would carry himself very carefully, and he would walk up and down the street slowly so as not to upset his caps, but he would say, "Caps, caps for sale, 50 cents a cap." Well, one day nobody was buying any caps. Nobody even wanted one of the red caps from the very top. So he decided it was a good day to take a walk in the country. So he picked a road that led out of town, and he walked out of town, and as he walked out of town he would call, "Caps, caps for sale, 50 cents a cap." But he just kept walking right out of town, and soon he was in the country. And he walked for a little while until he saw a nice tree. And he thought, that looks like a nice place for a rest. So he decided to sit down against the tree, so he very carefully sat down and leaned back. And before he took his rest, he checked to make sure that his caps were all in order. First his own cap, then the blue caps, then the brown caps, then the gray caps, then on the very top, the red caps. And they were all in place, so he settled back and went to sleep. And after a long rest, he woke up nice and refreshed, and he was ready to go back to his village to sell some caps. But before he could get up, he had to check to make sure that his caps were all in order. So he felt his head, and all he felt was his own cap. Well, what happened to his caps? He looked to the left of him. No caps. He looked to the right of him. No caps. He looked behind the tree. No caps. Well, then he looked up in the tree, and what do you think he saw? On each branch of that tree was a monkey, and on each monkey there was a blue, or a brown, or a gray, or a red cap. Well, peddler needed his caps to take him back to the village. So he looked up at them, and he shook his fist at those monkeys, and he said, "You monkeys, you give me back my caps." Well, the monkeys, all they did was they shook their fist back at the peddler, and they said, "Tss, tss." Well, that made the peddler mad. So he shook both of his fists, and he said, "You monkeys, you give me back my caps." Well, the monkeys, all they did was they shook both their fists back at him, and they said, "Tss, tss, tss." Well, by now the peddler was really kind of getting upset, so he stamped his foot, and he said, "You monkeys, you give me back my caps." Well, the monkeys, all they did was they stamped their foot back at him and said, well, by now the peddler was furious, and he stamped both his feet and he said, "You monkeys, you give me back my caps." Well, all the monkeys did was stamp both their feet back at him and say, "Tss, tss, tss." Well, the peddler was so mad that he took off his cap and he threw it on the ground and he started to storm away. But then the shower of caps came down, because every monkey had taken off his cap and thrown it down. So there was a shower of blue and brown and gray and red caps. So the peddler picked them all back up, set them on his head, first his own cap, then the blue caps, then the brown caps, then the gray caps, then the red caps on the very top. And carefully, so as not to upset his caps, he walked back into town saying, "Caps, caps for sale, 50 cents a cap." And that's the story of caps for sale.